When you think about supercars, your mind automatically portrays a mix of futuristic style, high-tech engineering, advanced science, and almost like something out of a magical artwork, all squeezed into one really fast car. Well, your imagination perfectly matches the theme of these supercars. They've been ubiquitous as long as cars have been around. These are the cars that don't play by the rules. From the start, they have consistently broken boundaries and spearheaded automotive innovation. Supercars are rare, lightning fast, and encapsulate all our fantasies about luxury cars. From their earliest days to the latest models, important parts and cool tech have turned regular cars into speed machines. One big reason supercars have transformed into our dreamable object is due to a proper harnessing of technology. Even though they're incredibly fast, technology has transcended the barrier of making them driving friendly for people. Essentially, humans always fancied the faster speed of their vehicles, and these amazing cars made it possible. As supercar technology keeps advancing, it has gradually transformed how we live. The first feature of today's supercars is they're packed with fancy technology that makes them awesome and gets people excited. According to motor journalist Abigail Bassett,
supercars are these haloed ideal vehicles. They are things we hang on our walls, they're aspirational. They're pieces of automotive history that just connect with us in a way that's emotional. I would define the evolution of a supercar as a vehicle that's gone from being capable of driven only by professionals to something that practically anyone can drive thanks to technology.
For more than 130 years, the car industry has been all about making special cars that are meant to be going super fast and looking really awesome. Supercars' definition will not be the same to everyone. According to motor journalist Tony Quiroga, when he hears the term supercar, he thinks it is a perfect amalgamation of technology and engineering. Technology will be so advanced that it, as a forerunner, will portray the power and design both in the car. Two most indispensable things to consider for a supercar to become the supercar. He also added that a supercar should have the ravishing features powered by the technology that will easily gain praiseworthy reactions like, "Wow," or "This piece looks so beautiful." They showcase engineering strength and powerful engines, as if the future has arrived even before the emergence of the real future. The concept of making a supercar is like making a pathway to the technologically affluent future. It shows off what a car maker, with their finest ability and sought-after searches for innovations, can do when they focus on design, engineering, speed, and tech, all for a one supercar. Supercar is not something you make in bulk. It's basically a company's best work. A project that shows off how great they are at making cars that are super fast, super stylish, and super luxurious. The game's main mission is to bring extreme performance. Supercars exemplify the ideal of a perfect car. You can think of them as a perfect mix of new ideas, power, and sheer attractiveness, all wrapped up in one amazing piece of mechanical art.
Engineers and technologists in today's supercar era are looking to continually push the envelope, and it can be a matter of a few miles an hour. It can be a matter of a few tenths of a second faster, and as we get to the very pointy end of performance, that's going to become a higher and higher stakes race.
The race to build the best supercar today actually started way back when people first wanted to travel by machines. Tracing back to the late 1800s, cars back then were just starting out. Nothing fancy like supercars. They were just meant to get you from one place to another. Many inventors were striving to create the first functional car for personal transportation. Since most people rarely traveled far from home, cars were a completely new and different concept. From the start, the car industry drew in talented engineers who were passionate about new technology. Almost similar to the rush for innovation seen in the early days of Silicon Valley with computers, the curator of Peterson Museum, Mr. Leslie Kendall, added that at the back in the early phase of the development of automobiles, cars with steam, internal combustion engine and electric cars were all contesting head-to-head simultaneously to thrive the automobile industry. But the decision was drawn upon not just only the car makers, it was about people who would get to decide which one would work for the future. A guy named Carl Benz in Germany had a big idea. Why not use engines instead of horses to power cars? He wanted to make a vehicle that didn't need horses to pull it. But there was a problem. There were no cars, and definitely no engines for them. So Carl Benz started from scratch. He worked hard to make a car that ran on an engine. After trying many times, he finally put a small engine on a carriage with 3 wheels. This changed how people travelled. Carl Benz called his invention the Benz patent motor wagon. Back then, he probably didn't realise how big of a deal it would be, but this invention changed everything. It created the start of the car industry and changed how people got around forever. The 1886 patent wagon is widely recognised as the first car, marking the invention of the modern automobile. Mercedes-Benz is the car company most closely linked to the entire history of the automobile, from its inception to the present day. Leslie Kendall also added that Benz patent motor wagon was completely different from that of early days transportation. It was a 3-wheeled vehicle with a size as small as that. It resembles more of a horse-drawn carriage than a traditional car people perceive in their minds of today's car. And it is not unusual to see a piece of unique car in every stage of the development of automotive history. That's why Benz's motor wagon is deemed a revolutionary invention when it was firstly dropped in its feet in 1886. That's why Benz was considered one of the most influential persons in the history of automobiles, for giving a shape to traditional transportation when people merely used to think of cars. It's because the only way to transport at that time was limited to walking, riding a bicycle, horse, carriage, or train. That 3-wheeled vehicle weighs around 100 kilograms. It had a single-cylinder, 4-stroke engine that was capable of making only 9/10 of 1 horsepower.
There was no infrastructure, there were no roads suited for these cars. The idea of a car was brand new. I really cannot emphasize enough how revolutionary this was for not only personal mobility, but the human race and the progress it made in the ensuing century.
The patent motor wagon played a big part in getting people moving, but it was the first version of the internal combustion engine that really changed everything in the end.
It was man's ability to basically be self-propelled. The gasoline car gave a lot of freedom to people. These were objects, the power of which you had in your hand or you had at your foot. They were entirely up to you. You didn't have to worry about feeding it oats, so you don't have to worry about it getting sick, at least organically. You didn't have to worry about it getting worn out. The cars didn't do that, so people thought, we can have fun with these cars.
Compared to living things like horses, internal combustion engines are much more dependable. Despite being small and light, they can produce a ton of power. This means they can be used for all sorts of useful things, from early planes to small chainsaws.
The early ones were noisy and loud and very unreliable, but gasoline was readily available. Eventually, they figured out a lot of the early teething problems, and you could get a car that would run quickly and run well, and you could get from point A to point B without a horse.
The development of combustion technology comes from 2 big changes in society: petrol becoming easy to find, and precision machining becoming more common and easier to do. The internal combustion engine emerged as a result of advancements in modern machining. This technology, which allowed precise measurements down to thousandths of an inch, was essential for developing these engines. In the mid-19th century, such precision didn't exist, and without it, internal combustion engines wouldn't have been possible. Internal combustion engines work on 4 main principles. First, air is drawn into a cylinder as the piston moves up. Then, the air and fuel mixture is compressed. Next, a spark ignites the mix, causing an explosion that pushes the piston down and moves the machine forward. Finally, the exhaust gas is released as the piston moves back up. This 4-step process advanced alongside precision machining because building a car engine requires highly accurate measurements. While the patent motor wagon is a big deal, it's still just an early version of a car. It doesn't even have a steering wheel because, like the term automobile, that hasn't been invented yet.
It blew people's minds. It was amazing. Where's the horse? This thing moves. How does that happen? Today, if you look at a 900 horsepower Ferrari, it blows your mind. It's stunning. How does that work? So in a sense, they're related. You know, the automobile technology march has continued to produce things that astound.
Since investors were not fully convinced with the original concept of Benz, they attempted to refine Benz's original concept. Yet it wasn't until 1901 that the automobile truly took form. Emil Jelinek, an Austrian businessman, who commissioned the Daimler Motor Company to craft a special vehicle. The result was the Mercedes 1901, often praised as the first true car. It had a strong steel frame, a powerful engine, and a clever radiator design that made it the blueprint for modern cars. The Mercedes 1901 set the basic blueprint for most 20th century cars. It had a pressed steel chassis, a low-mounted high-performance engine for stability, passenger seats, a steering wheel, and a unique front radiator. This groundbreaking vehicle became the standard for future automotive design. Even though 1901 laid out the proper foundation for the modern cars, it took a farmer from the Midwest to give the real value to those modern cars, and some British high society daredevils took it on to hanker after speed by pushing the envelope. Today's supercars are astonishingly fast and exquisitely engineered, pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Supercars are all about reaching one extreme and then surpassing it. There's always room for development, and it's up to the technicians to explore these possibilities and make them viable for a passenger car. It's surprising, but regular cars actually help make supercars what they are today. The whole story of transportation is really about how people move around and stay connected, and how we get from one place to another. Back in the early 1900s, driving long distances in a car was not a cakewalk. Before cars, people mostly used horse-drawn carriages, but even though cars were new, mostly rich people drove them for fun. But then, in 1908, Ford made the Model T, and that changed everything. Ford made cars, so regular people could afford them. Some people even say the Model T is the most important car ever because it made cars a normal part of life for everyone.
When the Model T was introduced by Ford Motor Company, there was a huge change in the social fabric of America and the world. It gave the common man the ability to go beyond a 20-mile radius from home.
The Model T is the idea of one guy, Henry Ford. He was the son of a farmer. He dreamed of a future where everyone can have their own car.
Prior to Henry Ford with the Model T, the horse was the main means of transportation, and that was a constraint, of course, on everyone's lives. But just to think, in the morning, I'm going to go see Aunt Mary 100 miles away. You couldn't do it. The Model T made motoring affordable to the average working man. The notion of a family car was born with the Model T. It didn't exist before then.
Affordability was crucial in the early years, as popular demand for cars was needed to develop the infrastructure and industries that eventually produced supercars. The Model T and modern supercars like the LaFerrari are directly connected. Without the Model T, supercars wouldn't exist. Before Henry Ford came up with his solidly built Model T, cars' parts used to be custom built, meaning each car used to have their parts bespoke to that car. This made the bulk building of those parts extremely expensive and time-consuming. Ford finally got rid of the hassle of creating parts specific to that particular car, but rather they built each part in a way that would be fittable to any car of that particular model, and Model T was the introducer of that. This very idea of being able to use the parts of one Model T to another Model T was called interchangeable parts. And by the way, it wasn't rocket science at that time. It was a very cliché-ridden way for other industries who may have not used that in the cars. That's why Ford applied it to cars. Since cars need many parts, these interchangeable parts could easily seek the solutions to abate the overall costing of the manufacturing of these cars. To cut costs, Ford cleverly recycled materials. He asked suppliers to deliver parts in wooden crates. which were then used as planks for Model T pickup truck beds. This minimized waste and reduced production costs. It was one of the earliest examples of sustainability in the automotive industry. Ford's use of interchangeable parts and sustainable practices made the Model T affordable and accessible. This transformation turned the automobile from a luxury item into an everyday essential.
There had been enough development. Why didn't they make sports cars? Why didn't they make cars just for the sheer joy of driving them? The speeding ticket was invented the day after the automobile because the towns hated the cars coming through so fast.
While the Model T focused on utilitarian transportation, in another corner of the car industry, other engineers aimed to heighten the pleasure of driving. Perhaps the best example was the 1913 Mercer Type 35J raceabout. Many people regard the Mercer as the world's first sports car, or at least America's first. It was known for its high performance and minimal comfort. The Mercer 35J, widely seen as one of the first purpose-built sports cars, featured a distinctive T-head engine set in a well-balanced chassis. The Mercer raceabout had a big 4-cylinder engine, which was considered really fancy back then. Its chassis sat really low, almost touching the axles to keep it close to the ground. The performance of the 35J was really impressive. Even though cars had only been around for less than 30 years, the raceabout could already go up to 90 miles per hour, which was super fast.
That was really something that would have made the Mercer the Lamborghini of its day, way more car than even the roads were capable of handling. That's another part of being a supercar, is the look. You have to have the look. What good is spending a lot of money on a vehicle, or anything, really, and going out and about with it and expressing yourself if nobody knows what you have?
While the Mercer car drew a lot of attention, another advanced machine brought in a new technology, the dual overhead camshaft. This innovation dates back to the early days of automobiles. The dual overhead camshaft allows an engine to have 4 valves per cylinder. One camshaft handles the intake and the other manages the exhaust. This design lets the engine run faster, giving it more power and better performance. The Peugeot L76 was the first car to have dual overhead camshafts, and it was a game changer. It won the 1912 French Grand Prix. Surprisingly, even today, you can still see this same technology in the simplest and cheapest economy cars. Back in the old days, starting a car was a tough job. It required a lot of effort to crank the engine by hand, and it was pretty risky too. But everything changed when the 1912 Cadillac came out. It was the first car to have an electric starter. This really raised the bar for cars from then on. So Cadillac earned their reputation through hard work, and they totally deserved it. The electric starter not only made starting a car easier, but it also paved the way for the advanced electrical systems we see in today's supercars. And they have the 1913 Lancia Theta to thank for pioneering these concepts. The Theta was the first car to have a complete electrical system. Lancia was known for being innovative in the automotive world. They were always trying new things and pushing the boundaries of car technology, both for racing and for everyday street cars. Even though cars were advancing in the early 1900s, the roads they drove on were still lacking. The main problem was that there weren't enough roads, especially paved ones. At the beginning of the 20th century, less than 10% of the world's industrialized countries had paved roads. Most of the roads were just dirt paths that often turned into muddy messes.
The roads that were there were extremely rough and way beyond what we consider a rough road today. I mean, they were trails, so the first motorists were constantly struggling against the elements.
Basic roads date back to Roman times, but modern road construction methods began with Scottish engineer John Macadam in the early 1800s. Macadam came up with the idea of building roads with layers of soil and crushed stone, compacting them with a heavy roller to create a strong foundation that can withstand the weather. It wasn't until cars became popular and roads were built that people could travel long distances regularly. The widespread use of asphalt roads helped improve driving, but it took daring and adventurous drivers to really push the development of high-performance sports cars. Cars are an important part of modern life. They give us the freedom to travel and transport goods and services over long distances. From the earliest days of cars, drivers have always enjoyed testing their limits to see how fast and far they can go. In the early days, people who were quick to accept new technology didn't worry about its limitations. Driving for fun becomes a popular hobby, and as more people hit the road, more of them start racing. Since cars were first invented, racing has been a big deal for almost every car maker. The 1920s were a time when wealthy individuals raced for fame, and car companies used racing to make better supercars.
The cars today seem like they're built to intimidate. It's like, I'm rich, and I'm going to flaunt it. You're just going to have to live with my being so cool that I can afford this. Back then, wealth was quieter. Wealth expressed itself in bespoke products.
In 1924, Bugatti revealed what many consider to be the world's first supercar, the Bugatti Type 35. This car really made Bugatti famous. It was designed for Grand Prix racing and was incredibly successful during the exciting 1920s, becoming one of the most victorious race cars ever.
Everything that came before it kind of came together in this cohesive shape, and it was just unquestionably perfect, really wonderful machine, a great all-rounder, powerful, charismatic, beautiful, fast.
The Type 35 is known as one of the most naturally beautiful cars ever made, and it gains attention because of its advanced engine. The Type 35 featured an exceptional gearbox, light steering, and easy handling, making it a joy to drive. As a complete package, it stood out among pre-war racing cars. The car weighs only 750 kilos and has a front axle made of hollow forged metal to make it lighter. But what really stands out about the car is its wheels, which are made of cast aluminum. These wheels help the car handle better and are still important today. While French racers are becoming really strong, the Germans are doing something different with the Mercedes 95. They take an engine that they were originally using for planes in World War I, bombers and fighter planes, and they use it in a car. The car has a huge supercharged 7-litre engine with 6 cylinders that makes almost 100 horsepower. The 95 is also special because it's the first Mercedes to have an overhead camshaft. It's pretty amazing that they're using an engine from a plane in a car. This engine could keep a heavy plane in the air for hours, but now it's powering a car on the ground. Even though people talk a lot about the engine of the 95, the brakes are actually the coolest part. It's the first Mercedes to have brakes on all 4 wheels, which became the standard for cars all over the world.
It has a Teutonic severity about its appearance that, in its day, you could say it was a little bit feared. It was a very intimidating looking car, but that's what you wanted. You wanted to look intimidated. You were in a car that, frankly, was the king of the road.
In England, the passion for speed and racing led to the creation of one of the greatest British cars, the 1927 Bentley 4.5 litre. Known as the Bentley Blowers, these cars were incredibly powerful. There have always been fast cars in every era. The blower Bentleys were like the supercars of their time. In the early 1920s, Bentley won a lot of races, but by the late 1920s, other car companies were catching up. The founder of Bentley, a W.O. Bentley, decides to make a bigger and more powerful engine. He thinks making a bigger engine is the best way to get more power. But one of Bentley's drivers, Tim Birkin, has a different idea. He's part of a group of guys who love racing and become known as the Bentley Boys.
Now, the Bentley Boys were this group of wealthy playboys, basically, that enjoyed racing, and they'd take their Bentleys and they'd go and race in these races like the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and they'd actually win. The Bentley Boys took Bentley to racing glory in the 1920s. They drove Bentleys to the limit across some of the most famous racetracks in Europe, including Brooklands and Le Mans, and it was this group of gentleman racers that really gave Bentley its performance heritage. And they won Le Mans with Bentley 5 times between 1924 and 1930.
Birkin notices that Bugatti and Alfa Romeo are doing well in races with supercharged cars, so he decides he wants to put the same kind of system in his Bentley. The supercharged 4.5-litre Bentley, known as the Blower, is one of the most iconic cars in Bentley's history. It was created by Sir Tim Birkin, one of the famous Bentley boys. Birkin hired engineer Amherst Villiers to design a supercharger for the car. A supercharger is a device that pumps more air into an engine. This extra air allows the engine to burn more fuel, which makes more power. The 4.5 blower isn't the first car with a supercharger, but it's one of the most important early ones. When Tim Birkin adds a supercharger to his Bentley 4.5 litre, it gives the car an extra 65 horsepower and helps it come in second place at the 1930 French Grand Prix. The blowers are a symbol of a powerful era in British car history that helped Bentley become one of the top makers of supercars. But engineers are always looking for new ways to make cars more powerful and perform better. Since the beginning of cars, there have always been engineers and car companies trying to make the fastest car. The desire for speed has always driven car innovation. We're still learning a lot from racing. Iconic racing cars, like the Silver Arrows, are helping to shape the future of supercars. These supercars show us what the future of cars might look like. One of the things about supercars is there is an addictiveness that comes with it. It's like once you go to 100, you're like, okay, it's not so bad. It's like your fear threshold gets a little bit further out. They're all just pushing that envelope a little bit further, a little bit further. The high-tech, high-speed cars we see today owe a lot to lessons learned from racing in the 1930s, especially during the Silver Arrow era. This period of peak road racing significantly influenced the advanced capabilities of modern supercars. The first Silver Arrow racing era started in the 1930s. It is almost unbelievable, but these Silver Arrows were as powerful and as fast as today's Formula One cars, so you have these really fast German automobiles that the press labels Silver Arrows because of how competent they are at going high rates of speed. The Silver Arrows came into existence because of a rule made in 1932. The governing body of Grand Prix racing in Paris decides that race cars can only weigh 750 kilos. Mercedes became well known for racing around this time. Racing is really dangerous. Cars go super fast, sometimes over 300 kilometers per hour, and they often go faster than they can handle. To make it safer, officials decide to limit the weight of the cars, thinking that this will mean they'll have to use smaller, lighter engines. But they're wrong. The cars are way more advanced than they expected. Two German car companies, Mercedes-Benz and their big rival Auto Union, decide to go all out to win. In the 1930s, the Mercedes Silver Arrows were unbeatable. In 1937, Mercedes-Benz introduced the W125. It has a supercharged straight 8-cylinder engine that makes a crazy 646 horsepower, more powerful than the Formula One cars of the time. Another big competitor is the Auto Union Type C, which is also a masterpiece of engineering. It has 16 cylinders, a mid-engine, a 6-litre capacity, 520 horsepower, and a torque of about 870 Newton meters. The Auto Union Silver Arrows are significant because they paved the way for today's supercars. Their mid-engine layout, lightweight build, and powerful engines were groundbreaking at the time. With a top speed of around 330 to 340 kilometers per hour, they're incredibly fast for their time. While Grand Prix racing focuses on speed and power, in France, luxury and high performance are also changing. It's hard to impress people with a supercar today the way Bugatti did back then. In 1934, John Bugatti designed a new car that combines elegance, quality and performance, the Bugatti Type 57. The Type 57 was the first technical platform for Bugatti. It brought financial success to the company. It is the most beautiful, the most balanced, the most incredibly well-designed car of all the late 1930s supercars. The car's body is made from a special metal alloy used in aviation, primarily magnesium with a bit of aluminum. Since this alloy can't be welded, the factory uses hand rivets to put the sheets together. But the real innovation comes from its chassis. It's the first time a car has a basic structure that can be used for lots of different body styles. And they all look really cool. The most famous version is called the Type 57 Atlantique. They only make 4 of them, and today there are only 3 left. This car is one of them. while the Germans and the French are busy making their version of a superfast car. In America, another company starts making its own special kind of fast cars. In the 1920s and 1930s, if you said you drove at Duesenberg, that was it. They were the Naples Ultra as good as it got car. This is a vehicle that embodied every technical innovation of its day, and not just in a tiny little engine. The 1933 Duesenberg SJ is a supercharged 7-litre 8-cylinder powered rocket. They took double overhead cams, 4 valves per cylinder, aluminum construction, and they scaled it up to 420 cubic inches for the Model J. All of a sudden you had a car that had 265 horsepower when its nearest domestic competitor had 130 horsepower. The Duesenberg SJ is super powerful, so much so that in the early ads, they say nobody can pass you unless you let them. But the company keeps working to make it even faster and always wants to find new ways that'll bring out more performance. A couple years later, they said, well, what if we experimented with the manifolding? And then they filed a kind of manifold they called ram's horn induction. A couple of reports estimated that it turned 400 horsepower on the dynamometer. The engine was said to be so powerful it would chew up the dynamometer. There wasn't a dyno that was powerful enough at the time to handle it. While Duesenberg works on making their cars more powerful, the French government in France offers money to help car companies succeed. That's how the Delahaye Type 145 comes about. Before Ferrari, the Delahaye 145 was a really cool car. The French government promises a big cash prize to any company that can beat Italy's speed record on a racetrack near Paris. Delahaye steps up with a 4.5-litre V12 powered racer. V12 engines became darlings of the performance world because you had so many more power impulses per revolution of the crankshaft. And that greater quantity of power impulses gave a smoother delivery of power, more consistent power, and ultimately greater power. Pilot René Dreyfus broke the speed record with an average lap of 146.6 kilometers per hour. But the story of the car didn't end there. After World War II, builder Henri Chaperon acquired a few pre-war Type 145 Grand Prix chassis and decided to turn them into road cars. These old Grand Prix cars quickly became stylish street cars, like transforming a tough boxer into someone dressed in a fancy suit. The supercar story is all about trying to go really fast and using the latest science. But it all stops, suddenly, on September 1st, 1939, when Germany's Nazi Party invades Poland. During World War II, all the fun stuff gets put on hold. All the smart people are busy making weapons instead of cool cars. But even though cars have to take a backseat to war, people still want to make awesome cars. After the war, there's a big race to make the best sports cars, leading to the birth of the world's first supercar. Throughout history, people have always wanted to go fast when they're driving. The work done by early car pioneers changes how society works, leading to the creation of sporty cars, which eventually become known as supercars. They're basically the ultimate example of people wanting really fast cars. The movement from horse and carriage to the patent motor wagon to the supercars of today is this progression of finding ways to get people to connect in physical space through automotive engineering and technology, and through the advancement of things like engines and transmissions and design, and our desire as humans to connect in a way across space that is engaging and fun.